This morning on my way into work, I counted the number of construction projects between my house and the MARTA station with signs that read mixed use or in-town living. There were 3 in a quarter-mile stretch. And it's hardly just the in-town neighborhoods sporting projects touting quote-unquote in-town living. That is to say, pedestrian-friendly, dense development. Last week, we told the story of one suburban city that underwent a wholesale transformation of its downtown to make it more people-centered. And many other metro Atlanta communities have followed suit. So today we step back to ask a larger question. Why is this trend happening at all? This is What's Next ATL, powered by the Atlanta Regional Commission, where we explore the big new ideas shaping Metro Atlanta. I'm Kate Sweeney. This season, we're exploring the question of how to build the communities we want. And today, we're asking why suddenly it seems possible to live just down the street from our grocery store or coffee shop, when maybe it didn't 15 years ago. Why are these trends sweeping so many small cities and suburbs now? And what can we expect to happen next? For this, we're talking with Ellen Dunham-Jones. Dunham-Jones directs the Master of Science in Urban Design program at Georgia Tech. She's well known for her TED Talk called Retrofitting Suburbia, all about taking outdated suburban spaces like old shopping malls and office parks and revamping them to fit 21st century needs and tastes. In fact, she confessed she's a little obsessed with suburbia, having spent her formative years there.
I grew up in New Jersey.
But as many fond memories as she has of the suburban places where she grew up, she says that in general, suburbia isn't aging so well.
Most people love their individual house, but we're certainly seeing increasing numbers of dead and dying malls, strip malls, big box stores, lots of dead retail. We're seeing office parks having very high vacancy rates, up to 20-some%. And a lot of that has to do with changing demographics, aging properties, and a revival of a lot of those old main streets. So we're starting to see a lot of folks say, why can't we build more of kind of like that old stuff?
Here's where it gets interesting. When she says that old stuff, what she's talking about are also suburbs, but an older iteration of suburbs, the ones built way back before World War II.
The pre-war suburbs are lovely leafy places that are very likely to continue to hold value for a very long time. They tend to be somewhat more transit-oriented, often built around train stations. The stuff from the 1920s and earlier still had something of a main street. They had a mix of building types, a mix of incomes. They were fairly walkable.
Here in Metro Atlanta, we see examples of these early suburbs in places like Inman Park and Virginia Highland, neighborhoods built around the city's once extensive streetcar system. But then that system died out, car culture ramped up after World War II, and suburbs started marching farther and farther out from the city center. So today's vogue for mixed use is really just a return to the good old-fashioned pre-war mix of pedestrian-friendly main streets and corner drugstores we can walk to. The first contemporary development in the region to really show off this style was Atlantic Station, which opened in 2005. But now it's taking off in suburban communities. Chamblee, Hapeville, Woodstock, Duluth, Forest Park, Tucker, Sandy Springs, and on and on. Why is that? You've likely heard that the Atlanta region's growing fast. Well, it's suburban counties that are actually leading the way in that growth. Gwinnett County is expected to be the most populous by 2040, and Forsyth County is expected to grow the fastest. And Dunham-Jones says many of the people demanding the new urbanism are OTP residents who were kids when the car-centric post-war suburbs were first built.
I mean, the baby boomers are the generation who the suburbs were built for, and they're just hitting a point where even a lot of the boomers are starting to question if this is really quite what I want now. They want to age in place. They want to stay in the same suburban community with their friends and doctors. But a lot of them really would like to be able to walk to more activities, volunteer in things.
And then there are the younger generations, Gen X and millennials, many of whom don't really want to drive long distances to reach their jobs.
A lot of that younger population, younger working age folks, really want an urban lifestyle. But the reality is Most of them are saddled with a lot of student debt. They can't afford that expensive condo or apartment, often that's in the most urban location. And the reality is most of their jobs are out in the suburbs.
Many of our region's bustling job centers are in places like Cumberland, the Perimeter, and the airport.
So you've got this younger generation looking for a more urban lifestyle, but out in a suburban location. And you've got the older generation who are beginning to think about downsizing. So the two biggest demographic bubbles are kind of converging on having a lot more interest in an option that simply hasn't existed. We have a shortage of homes that can provide a more urban lifestyle. So we're seeing a whole lot of it suddenly getting built.
So everyone, that's the reason for the live, work, play signs we're seeing all over the region. If we're older, and a huge number of us are, we want to stay in our communities. And those communities need to work for us if we're, say, no longer driving. And if we're younger, we may not want to drive to get to where we need to go anyway. It's a positive trend, right? But there are some significant speed bumps on the road to a more pedestrian-friendly, connected Metro Atlanta. For one, as you may recall, a civic dinner attendee who lives south of I-20 mentioning back in episode 1 of this season, we're not seeing walkable places sprouting in every community that wants them. When they do sprout up, these live, work, play developments often lack affordably priced housing, and their soaring popularity is driving up home prices in nearby communities. And speaking of home prices, have you looked to rent or buy lately? Maybe you've noticed housing affordability is a growing concern in general across the metro area. Rents and mortgages are just rising a lot faster than wages. Okay, now the good news. There are folks across the region who are working to address these issues. In the city of Atlanta, where the median rent has increased by more than 70% between 2000 and 2017, but the median income only rose 48%, they've announced a new housing affordability action plan. Among other things, the plan calls for creating 20,000 affordable homes by 2026, while increasing the overall supply. For its part, ARC has developed what it calls its regional housing strategy to help local governments gain a better understanding of their housing challenges and to make it easier for people to find affordable housing through things like preserving existing affordable housing stock. We have links for both of these projects and more on housing affordability throughout Metro Atlanta on the page for this episode at our website. Up next, Ellen Dunham-Jones calls me out on the connection between my smartphone addiction and my love of Edison bulbs. True story, coming up. Last week, we asked you, what is the one thing you'd most like to improve about your neighborhood? Here's what you had to say. More than half of you, 57%, said you'd like to be able to walk to basic amenities like grocery stores. Exactly a third of you said you'd like more affordable housing. And about 10% of you said nothing. Your neighborhood is perfect as it is. To that last cohort, please tell me where you live. I'd like to move there. And all of this brings us to this week's question. This week, as we continue our conversation about creating the communities we want, Ellen Dunham-Jones touched on the criticality for neighborhoods that adapt to our needs as we grow older. Because here's the deal. Most of us these days want to stay in our homes as we age. 1 in 4 of us Metro Atlantans will be 60 or older by 2030. I know I've been thinking about that stat a lot since I first heard it last season. Recently, my spouse and I have been talking about expanding our little house, and he mentioned the possibility of adding a second floor. And I was like, no, all revved up on my newfound learning about what we need in our homes as we grow older. When we're older, I told him, we won't want to have to deal with stairs. I'm wondering how many of my contemporaries are thinking about these things. Probably not many. We hope to grow old in our place. How about you? How long do you plan to stay in your current Metro Atlanta neighborhood? That's the big question this week. And you'll find it over on the page for this episode at our website, what'snextatl.org/podcast. That's what'snextatl.org/podcast. And we have one more ask of you. You may have seen that we have really great t-shirts this season. They're extremely soft, which is pretty much my first criterion for any t-shirt. They say what's next ATL and listen to your community with a cool microphone graphic on the back. And now you can have one. The first 3 people to submit their iTunes reviews of What's Next ATL, need we say favorable reviews? You will get a free t-shirt. Just take a screenshot of your review and email it to us along with your name, address, and t-shirt size to what'snextatl@atlantaregional.org. Thanks. We're back. This episode, we're talking about the why behind the live-work-play craze, especially as we're seeing its rise in suburban communities. So we've talked about demographic changes, baby boomers and millennials, these 2 huge population groups, both wanting pedestrian-friendly spaces. But Ellen Dunham-Jones also chalks up the popularity of this movement to another movement that's been taking place pretty much in tandem with this one, and that's the rise of the internet.
More of us are spending all day in front of either, whether a big screen or just staring at a small phone. The more we begin to crave, what are the experiences I can't get online? And we want to be in a place where there's people, activities, some birds would be nice, just stimulation that's not coming from a screen.
Another thing that I noticed just in the one example of Woodstock that was interesting is there are some condos that are made to look like a 19th century mill, but it's not.
So we have that question all the time. How old is that building?
That's the voice of Brian Stockton, Woodstock's Director of Economic Development, whom we talked with last week.
Well, it was built in 2006. No, it wasn't. It has to be a repurposed mill building because that's just how good a job they did.
And it's interesting to me that in addition to that community, we seem to crave that sort of sense of we're someplace and it has a history.
I think there's a very strong desire for authenticity. Again, I think largely because we spend so much time with the digital, and we're seeing that actually younger generations are even more attuned and craving, creative office with recycled materials and things that feel real, as opposed to the big glass office, big floor plate, cubicle farm that is in fact the most cookie cutter kind of office. And a lot of these places that are recreating the patterns of the past often also get criticized as feeling kind of fake and phony and inauthentic, precisely because if they're not detailed really well, it can be really obvious that these are not real places of the past. So some of the newer communities are absolutely tuned to that younger generation. It's clearly very modern, but it's rewarding a pedestrian eye. It's not just designed to be seen by a car whizzing by at 60 miles an hour. It's more to be seen at the speed of a bike or a pedestrian.
I have to say that you're kind of freaking me out because, I think we all like to think our tastes are so original. The fact that I love those sort of Edison bulbs and the, like a wood block cutting board and like that kind of very authentic, has a history feel. And I'm hearing that maybe my tastes are just very much engineered by the generation I'm in and how I spend my time.
There wouldn't be advertising if it wasn't possible to manipulate all of us. And the job of the advertisers and the marketing folks is exactly that.
Boom, 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 boom. What are the catalysts at work here in Metro Atlanta that have pushed for this change toward, would you call it smart development?
Smart growth, new urbanism, walkable urbanism. I think there's any number of terms. They're all perfectly valuable. I definitely think the changing demographics and changing market preferences with that have made a big difference. I think the LCI process has been absolutely a catalyst at helping a lot of communities envision and plan for change.
The LCI program, or Livable Centers Initiative, as you've heard us talk about a lot now in the past couple of episodes, is that ARC grant program for communities in Metro Atlanta looking to become more pedestrian friendly and improve access to jobs and services.
I would also give a lot of credit to the incredible increase in the number of community improvement districts, the role that the private sector, recognizing that if they can make a place more walkable, they can charge more rent. That's a good bottom line reason to actually put in the bike lanes and the sidewalks. I would also credit, the cityhood movement, I think, has its pros and cons for all sorts of reasons, but it has certainly almost every one of the new cities now. They want a city hall, they want a town green, they realize that they want a unique identity, and they really want to change their zoning. They want to build some of that public gathering space infrastructure that was not privileged at all in the 50s and 60s. The model of the sort of post-war 20th century suburb was all about private life, and the public realm that we built was the commercial strip corridor. So suddenly now you've got places like Sandy Springs tearing down a Target store and creating City Springs, their city hall, their performing arts center, and the farmers market and housing, and all sort of doing that. And we see variations of that same playbook. I would hope that it doesn't take cityhood for a community to still decide that it wants to retrofit some of that, so those suburban, aging, underperforming suburban properties into more walkable urban places. And I see that happening all over the country.
Are there pitfalls that communities should look out for in trying to replicate a particular model of this kind of smart development?
Every community wants to redevelop that dead mall, dying office park, dead strip mall. But redevelopment will only work if there's a strong market. If you can't get a bank to finance it, if you can't get, the city has to also usually want to put some public money into it as well, and you don't want to waste public taxpayer funds if there just really isn't a market to make that succeed.
But she says tearing down and redeveloping from scratch is not the only answer to the question of how to transform our communities.
There can be great community benefits to re-inhabiting that existing building, but with more community-serving uses. There are tons of examples of medical uses, educational uses, gyms, libraries, going into, again, dead big box stores, malls, those kinds of places. And those can have tremendous community benefits.
So that's sort of like redevelopment light.
It's re-inhabitation. Redevelopment really is, you're scraping that building and you're building from scratch, putting in an urban framework.
And you're saying that's not the only option.
Not at all.
Yet another option for community reinvention, something she calls re-greening. Taking our paved-over landscapes and building things like stormwater parks like we see in Old Fourth Ward Park in Midtown, or Katherine Johnston Memorial Park in English Avenue. And although today we've been focusing primarily on ways that suburban communities have been reinventing themselves, Dunham-Jones says that even talking about things that way, OTP, ITP, is becoming an outmoded way of thinking about our region.
These differences between the suburbs and the cities just are melting away faster and faster. We're becoming a much more polycentric region, with a lot of our suburbs are becoming their own small cities, where we're seeing more places like Avalon in the north are seeing what they're going to try to do with the Aerotropolis. Suburbs just aren't as suburban as they used to be. What gives me hope is certainly seeing the successes. You see the tremendous embrace of these new downtowns throughout our suburbs. You see a lot of people sort of, well, I don't like density, but if Woodstock, if that's what you're talking about, yeah, that's nice. I'll take that.
That's Ellen Dunham-Jones, director of Georgia Tech's Urban Design Program. A lot of food for thought today on the forces, cultural, generational, and historical, changing what we want and need out of our neighborhoods. And who knows, maybe our grandkids won't even use the terms ITP and OTP. Lots of resources and further reading for this episode over at our website if you'd like to learn more about the strides being made in the name of affordable housing in the region or creating pedestrian-friendly communities, or about the demographic shifts that are causing leaders to rethink the ways our communities are conceived. You'll find all of that at whatsnextatl.org/podcast. Next time, we move from where we live to where we work.
Technology has reduced the costs of many things, and that's often meant small gains in quality of life or cost of living broadly. But I don't know of any cases where we have done well to compensate the people that are bearing that big cost.
Creating the workplaces we want in the age of automation. That's next time. If you're enjoying the show, please tell a friend. And we have a newsletter. You can get signed up for that at whatsnextatl.org. And don't forget to submit an iTunes review of What's Next ATL to us. You could win one of our great Season 2 t-shirts. Just take a screenshot of your review, email it to us along with your name, address, and t-shirt size. That email address is whatsnextatl@atlantaregional.org. Thanks so much. See you next time.
Blackness isn't just about race. I'm Deneen Milner, and I'm a New York Times bestselling author. On my podcast, Speakeasy with Deneen, I dive into the beauty and humanity of Blackness with people like writer Tayari Jones, journalist Demetria Lucas, and rapper Killer Mike. Listen to Speakeasy with Deneen from Georgia Public Broadcasting. Subscribe for free at gpb.org/podcasts or on your favorite podcast app.